Have you ever made a decision that turned out to be a mistake, but instead of admitting it, you suddenly started finding reasons why it was actually the right decision? Maybe you bought something expensive and later realized you didn't really need it. But instead of thinking, "I made a bad purchase," your mind immediately started saying, "Well, the quality is actually better, or I'll probably use it for years." Nothing about the situation changed. The only thing that changed was the story inside your head. This strange psychological process is called cognitive dissonance, and it happens when your thoughts, beliefs, actions, or values don't fit comfortably together. Your brain doesn't like that internal conflict, so it naturally tries to reduce the discomfort. And what's fascinating is that your brain doesn't always change the situation. Sometimes, it changes the way you interpret the situation. Imagine a simple sticky figure standing in front of two doors. One door represents what the person believes, and the other represents what the person actually did. At first, both doors are perfectly aligned. But then the character makes a choice that contradicts one of their beliefs. Suddenly, the two doors move apart. A visible gap appears between them. That gap represents cognitive dissonance. It's not necessarily a dramatic feeling. Sometimes it's just a small sense that something doesn't quite make sense. You might feel uncomfortable, defensive, confused, or even strangely motivated to explain yourself. Your brain is essentially noticing an inconsistency and trying to make the pieces fit together again. This happens because human beings don't simply want information. We want our experiences to make sense. We build an internal picture of who we are. We think of ourselves as intelligent, responsible, kind, independent, careful, or rational. When something we do conflicts with that picture, the brain experiences tension. For example, imagine someone who strongly believes they are a patient person. One day, they lose their temper over something extremely small. Later, they remember what happened. The event itself is over, but the psychological conflict remains. "I'm a patient person" doesn't comfortably match. "I just acted impatiently." That contradiction creates tension. The brain may respond by recognizing the mistake and adjusting the self-image. But it can also search for an explanation. "I was exhausted. They pushed me too far." Anyone would have reacted that way. Sometimes those explanations are reasonable. Sometimes they are simply ways of making the contradiction feel smaller. Now imagine a sticky figure holding a photograph of itself labeled, "Who I am." The character looks confident. Then another photograph appears, showing something that contradicts that identity. The character looks confused. This is an important part of cognitive dissonance. We don't only protect our opinions. We often protect our sense of identity. That's why changing your mind can sometimes feel surprisingly difficult. If an opinion is connected to your identity, changing that opinion may feel like more than changing an idea. It can feel like admitting that something about you is wrong. The brain may therefore search for evidence that supports the existing belief while paying less attention to information that challenges it. This doesn't mean people are deliberately lying. Most of the time, the process can happen without conscious awareness. Think about two sticky figures discussing the same situation. One says, "This was a great decision." The other says, "This was clearly a mistake." Both characters begin searching through memories. One remembers every detail that supports success. The other remembers every detail that supports failure. Interestingly, neither character necessarily invented their memories. They are simply giving different weight to different parts of the experience. Cognitive dissonance becomes especially interesting after we make difficult choices. Imagine standing between two jobs. One job pays more, but the other offers more freedom. You eventually choose one. At first, you may continue thinking about the option you rejected. What if I had chosen the other one? Would I have been happier? Your brain now has two competing realities: the life you chose and the life you could have chosen. To reduce that tension, you may naturally begin noticing more advantages in your decision and more disadvantages in the alternative. This can actually help you move forward. Instead of constantly living inside an imaginary alternative life, your mind begins adapting to the reality you selected. And this is where cognitive dissonance becomes more complicated. Not every form of rationalization is harmful. Sometimes your brain's ability to reinterpret an experience helps you adapt. Imagine someone who didn't get the opportunity they wanted. At first, they feel disappointed. Over time, they begin discovering new possibilities they hadn't considered before. Their interpretation changes. The event hasn't changed, but their relationship with it has. The problem appears when reducing psychological discomfort becomes more important than understanding reality. A sticky figure might stand beside a mirror. In the mirror, the character sees one version of the story. Then the camera moves around the mirror and reveals another perspective. This represents an important question. Are you changing your interpretation because you've learned something new, or because the truth is uncomfortable? That distinction can be difficult to notice. For example, imagine someone repeatedly postpones an important goal. They believe they are disciplined, but their behavior doesn't match that belief. The uncomfortable gap appears. One response is to say, maybe I'm just not capable. Another is to create endless excuses. But there is a third response. My current behavior doesn't match the person I want to become, so what can I change? That third response doesn't eliminate cognitive dissonance by creating an excuse. It uses the discomfort as information. This is one reason self-awareness can be so valuable. Instead of immediately defending every decision, you can pause and ask yourself a simple question. What exactly is uncomfortable here? Maybe the uncomfortable part isn't that someone criticized you. Maybe it's that part of their criticism is true. Maybe the uncomfortable part isn't that your plan failed. Maybe it's that you don't want to admit the plan needed to change. Maybe the uncomfortable part isn't that your opinion changed. Maybe it's that you built part of your identity around the old opinion. The sticky figure sits quietly on a chair while two thought bubbles appear above its head. One says, "What I believe." The other says, "What actually happened?" Instead of forcing the bubbles to match immediately, the character simply observes them. That pause is powerful, because psychological growth doesn't always mean feeling comfortable. Sometimes growth means becoming comfortable enough with discomfort to examine it honestly. Cognitive dissonance also explains why people can become attached to decisions that required a lot of effort. If you invested months, money, energy, or emotion into something, admitting that it wasn't working can feel painful. Your brain may naturally search for reasons to justify continuing. But effort itself doesn't prove that something is valuable. Sometimes the healthiest conclusion is simply that the information has changed. Imagine a sticky figure climbing a mountain. The character has already climbed for hours and suddenly realizes the path leads somewhere completely different from the original destination. One option is to keep climbing simply because so much effort has already been invested. Another is to stop, reassess the map, and choose a better direction. The second option may feel psychologically harder because it requires admitting that the previous path wasn't perfect. But changing direction isn't always failure. Sometimes it is learning. And that's the deeper lesson behind cognitive dissonance. Your brain isn't designed to constantly question everything about yourself. That would be exhausting. Instead, it tries to maintain a reasonably consistent picture of the world and of who you are. Most of the time, that stability is useful. But when your beliefs and behavior drift too far apart, psychological tension can appear. You don't need to eliminate that tension immediately. You can listen to it. The next time you notice yourself becoming unusually defensive about a decision, an opinion, or a mistake, don't automatically assume you're wrong. But don't automatically assume you're right either. Pause and ask what you're protecting. Are you protecting a fact? Are you protecting a belief? Are you protecting your reputation? Or are you protecting the image you have of yourself? A final sticky figure stands in front of two versions of itself. One version says, "I must always be right." The other says, "I can be wrong and still be okay." The second character slowly walks forward. Because a healthy mind doesn't need to be perfectly consistent all the time. It needs to be flexible enough to update. You can make a bad decision without becoming a bad person. You can change your opinion without losing your identity. You can admit that something didn't work without making your entire past meaningless. And perhaps most importantly, you can discover that being wrong isn't the opposite of being intelligent. Sometimes, recognizing that you were wrong is one of the clearest signs that your mind is still capable of learning. That uncomfortable moment when your beliefs and reality don't match isn't necessarily something your brain needs to hide from. Sometimes, it's the exact moment when your brain has the opportunity to grow.